So many people here. It's always exciting to see so many people who want to hear about React Native. My name's Olivia, and I've been at Facebook for 4 years. I spent some time working on mobile web and some time on the Android Messenger team. Most of what I've been doing is Android, and then I did the year in review greeting cards for New Year's last year. But now, what I do is I manage the React Native team in London. So I'll start out by talking about React, because it doesn't really make sense to talk about React Native without talking about React. React is a JavaScript framework for building UIs that we've been using at Facebook for years. It was open sourced a couple years back, and it took the JavaScript community by storm. Yeah, there are so many people using React. These are just a few of the companies using it. In Tomo's words, the way he likes to say this is that it's actually really hard to find a company that's not using React in some way. Now, React Native is still just getting started, but we're hoping to see some of these folks try it out. What made React so popular was that it was a new way of thinking, a new way to build UI. Now, there are a lot of advantages to using React, but the main thing that set it apart, and I think the most important thing, is that it's declarative. Now, those of you who already know React, bear with me as I explain what declarative actually means, because I know some of you folks already know this, but yeah, I want to make sure everybody's kind of on the same page. Imagine a super simple UI component. This is a gray like button, and when I tap it, it turns blue to show that I like something. And I can continue tapping it to toggle it back on and off. Now, the imperative standard way of writing this might look something like this. This says, if I like the thing, and there's currently no blue like on the screen, then remove the gray like and add the blue like, and otherwise do the opposite. Now, this is really focused on the transitions between the states. Yeah, I have to check what's currently on the screen and then make API calls to manipulate it, to make it look like what I want it to. This can be a fragile approach, especially when we add more states, making the UI more complex. So here's how you would write this in React. This is the declarative approach. The focus here is on the UI itself for a given state. This is much simpler to understand, and it's super predictable, because I can just look at this and see what the UI is supposed to look like. So that brings up the question. This means the framework has to figure out how to get from a gray like to a blue like and vice versa. Now, the simplest way to do this would be just to clear out the UI and to rebuild it every time something changes in the state. But when we have a bigger UI, this isn't necessarily performant. So let's look at this one, for instance. What I want to do is go from the top UI to the bottom view when I tap the like button. So what React does is it calculates the minimal set of changes to go from the current UI to the next one. In this case, that means the first thing I have to do is insert a node that says you like this. The second thing is change the color of the actual button. And the third thing is to set the text color to blue on the text like. And everything that's still on the screen just like stays there. It doesn't have to get re-rendered. Because React handles these transitions for you, it's much easier to learn. People can come in with no experience in React or even JavaScript and get to know the code base well enough that they understand it and can make meaningful changes within a week. And they can do that with less code than they had to write before. At Facebook, it's really important that we move quickly. This is one of our big values. And React allows us to iterate much more closely to the speed that we actually want to. And because it's so predictable, things that used to break every time somebody touched them can now be changed easily and with confidence. And this makes all our code more reliable overall. React has changed the way that we write code at Facebook. But until recently, this only applied to the web. The world is becoming increasingly mobile. More people are using mobile devices every day, and more people are coming online for the first time on their mobile devices. This is where the users are, but right now there are a lot of challenges to developing mobile apps. The first thing is that every time I make a change, I have to rebuild the app and I have to reinstall it on my device or on my simulator. This can take a long time. Actually, at Facebook scale, one of our apps takes 40 minutes to build. That's kind of ridiculous. Another thing is that you have to learn completely different sets of skills to write apps for Android, iOS, Windows Phone, etc. Now, some things need to be different to feel at home on the platform, but most of the stuff is in common. They have it in common, and there's no good reason to need different APIs to do the same things. And as we saw before, the imperative APIs that are standard on the web are also standard on mobile. Now, these are some of the challenges to writing native mobile apps. One suggestion to avoid these pains could be to use a mobile site instead of an app. And that works for a lot of cases. But right now, these are treated as second-class citizens in the mobile environment compared to native apps, and you don't have access to all the functionality you might want. Another approach could be to have a thin wrapper around a web browser as part of your native app. And this allows you to take advantage of the web technologies while being treated as a native app. However, these apps never feel quite at home on the platform. We've tried this at Facebook, and no matter how hard we try, we can't replicate the native experience. So if I'm building an app, that means I have two choices. I can make a native app, or I can wrap a web browser in a native app. So the choice is, do I spend a ton of time learning these different environments so that I can create a great user experience on each platform? Or do I decide it's more important to iterate quickly, responding to user feedback, and adding new features all the time? At Facebook, we decided that they're both important and that we can't afford to continue having to make this choice, which is why we're working on React Native. React Native is a project that allows you to write real native mobile apps using React and JavaScript technology. And here it is in action. On the left, we have real React code, and on the right, we have a native Android app. And this code is in the same style as the React code you saw before. Just a quick overview of what's going on. In the first method, getInitialState, we see that we have one piece of state, and that's a simple Boolean that says whether the toggle is on or off. The render method down here is what gets called every time the state changes, and it returns the UI on the screen, and the framework figures out how to transition to the new thing. And when the text is pressed, this handlePress method gets called, and the state gets changed. So here's the toggle going. Maybe. Yep, there it goes. Very simple. To clarify, in that app, there's no DOM and there's no web view. React Native renders to platform components. And for those of you who know Android, that app was a view group and a text view. So let's look back at our challenges and see how React Native handles them. Firstly, instead of building and installing on every change, you can actually instantly reload the code. And this can take less than a second. That's a big difference from 40 minutes. Rather than learning a different set of skills, I can actually learn React once. And then I can use that to write apps on different platforms. And you can use the same APIs to do the same things. And of course, you also get the declarative way of writing that React provides. A lot of frameworks chase this mythical motto that is write once, run anywhere. And we found that this just doesn't work. In order to feel good on the platforms, you have to write custom code. So instead, we've decided to go for this goal: learn once, write anywhere. And this means that people can just learn React and then use those skills to develop on any platform. This is a huge win for us at Facebook, since learning a platform actually takes a lot of time and energy. And now those engineers who had to do that can just be productive right away. We open sourced React Native for iOS at the F8 conference earlier this year. And I'm excited to tell you today what's happened since then. There's already a community forming around this. We have over 200 contributors, people contributing to React Native, making the framework better, and doing things that we wouldn't have been able to do by ourselves. On the left, here's some of the apps that are on the App Store built on React Native. Most of these are developed by people outside of Facebook. And on the right are some really cool tools that were built by members of the community. App Hub allows you to instantly update your iOS apps in production, and React Native Playground makes it really easy to test and share your apps. Now, since these were made by people not at Facebook, none of these things would have happened if we hadn't open sourced. One thing we made sure to do when we were open sourcing was to use the exact same version internally as we use externally. So we don't have a secret fork somewhere that's like Facebook-specific code. We just use what's up on GitHub. And we have incentive to make it really good. So we're always improving it and stabilizing it. Another thing that's happened since we open sourced the iOS is that we've launched React Native in the main Facebook app. This is ultimately how we, as Facebook, intend to make use of React Native. Being able to use React Native for products in the main app brings us a step closer to the developer environment that we want to have here at Facebook. And right now, we're just starting off with a few views, a few products. But we expect to make it more and more as time goes on. This is an example of that. Here's my list of events in the main Facebook app. And this was written entirely in JavaScript and React. And it feels just like the Objective-C one. We also launched the first Android app on React Native. Now, this wasn't a normal app launch. Normally, when an app launches on iOS first, that team has to go recruit Android engineers, and those Android engineers have to become familiar with the product and re-implement everything that was already done on iOS. And then the app launches on Android a year and a half later or something. But with Ads Manager, the team wrote the code for the iOS app entirely in JavaScript and React Native. And then they plopped that code into Android, saw what worked and what didn't work, and made some changes to make it feel really good on Android. It took far less time and far less people than it would have if they hadn't chosen React Native. We also ended up with 85% of the code shared between Android and iOS. This is incredible. Even though sharing all the code in an app isn't a goal of React Native, numbers like this show how powerful, show the powerful side effects of having the same APIs doing the same things. This number could have been higher if we'd compromised some of the native feel for each platform, but each app is going to have to find what's right for it. This is the Ads Manager app on both iOS and Android. Thanks to Dan for the puppies shots. So now see some of the navigation elements look a little bit different in order to look good on both Android and iOS. But all this other stuff in the middle, it's the same. So that's the core of the 85% of the code that's shared is just all the stuff that's the same, and all the business logic and all the things that you don't want to have to write twice. And the rest of it is that 15% that makes it actually look good on the platform. We can take a closer look at the Android app and see some of the things that you wouldn't be able to do if you weren't using native platform components. Like you wouldn't be able to do this in a web view. So watch closely, because these are going to go by kind of quickly. But here's the ripple. It's like a staple of material design. The overscroll, the pull to refresh, and the drawer. And these are all like elements of Android. And I guess I'll just leave it running for a while. But as we saw before, there are so many advantages to being open source. And the main question that we've gotten from the community over the last 6 months was, when is Android coming? Because even with the advantages of instant reload and declarative APIs, you can't get the full experience of React if it's only on one platform. So as Jay and Alex mentioned earlier, React Native for Android is now open source. This is, This is thanks to the hard work of the team in London. You can check out the code in the existing React Native repository. Now, I have to mention, this is still a very early version, so it's going to have some issues. We already know there's some inconsistencies between Android and iOS, and the product teams that we've worked with have done a really good job of working around these issues and bearing with us as we're doing this. But we figured it was more important to get it out into your hands than to try to make it perfect ourselves, because now you can help us. So what I'm going to ask of you is to report issues and submit pull requests, and if nothing else, just be patient with us. We're doing our best, and we think we've done a good job with what we're working on, but we still have a long way to go. So now that we've open sourced on Android, what do you get? I'll talk about the single workflow, the Android-specific APIs, custom components and modules, and hybrid app support. This is my video demo of the single workflow. Note that there's an Android emulator and an iOS simulator side by side here on this screen. So I'm developing for both at the same time. This is the Movies app. It's one of the samples that's up on the GitHub repo. And I'm just going to go through really quickly the process of save to reload. So I'm going to make some changes in the editor, and then those changes are going to propagate to both of these simulators at the same time. So here in the movie app, imagine the designer says, this title doesn't stand out enough, so change the font weight. These actually typically take a shorter period of time, but because it's doing two at once, it takes a little bit longer. And then maybe they say, actually, our users are all blind, so now you have to make the text bigger. I promise it doesn't normally take that long. So then say they say it's not ugly enough. So actually, we want it to be uglier. And let's make the background blue. But here I forgot to put quotes around the blue. So this is an error, and this is what an error looks like in React Native. It just looks like a red box that's in your face, and it doesn't crash the app. So I can simply reload the JavaScript again to make it work. Yep, so now it's blue. I'll go back, I missed something. So Ads Manager, I mentioned earlier, was programmed on iOS first and then ported to Android. In the future, maybe these can be built simultaneously. Another part of Learn Once, Write Anywhere, and this single workflow is that we get to use the same tools on Android and iOS. And that's really cool. So this is a tool that we have that we call the Element Inspector. And it just allows you to go in and look at an element and see the information about it. Like it tells you the styles, it tells you the hierarchy, and you can go up the hierarchy and the margins and stuff like that. But this is just one example of the types of tools that you can now use on both platforms. And you saw earlier the elements of Android in the Ads Manager app. But here's some of the components that are in the open source repository right now. And there will be more coming over the next couple weeks. These are some of the Android-specific APIs. Toast is actually not a component, it's a module. It's something separate. But Toasts are specific to Android, and you can make them come up. There's an API for that on JavaScript. So how do we actually differentiate this code? When we have this 85% code shared and 15% code not shared, how do we differentiate it for that 15%? So there's two ways. The first way is just use an if statement. I can say, if I'm on Android, then do one thing, and if I'm on iOS, do another thing. And then the second way is that I can actually name the file names of my components, blah.ios.js or blah.android.js. And then the packager, the thing that does the bundling of the JavaScript to serve it to you, figures out which one is correct to use, depending on the platform that requested it. So what if I have done a lot of work and created some highly specialized components and modules? Maybe it's logic, maybe it's some views that were complicated and took a long time to write, and I wrote them in Java. Well, one thing React Native allows you to do is to wrap those components in JavaScript APIs. So you can still get the fast iteration of using React Native with the existing components that you've already made. And also, it can be used for part of your app. So this is something that we have to do for the Facebook app, because it would make no sense if we actually had to scrap the app and rewrite the entire thing in React Native. So what we're doing instead is taking one view at a time and either converting it or making a new one in React Native. And you can do that too. It's pretty easy to do this with the APIs. Open sourcing Android was a huge milestone in React Native. And we've made a lot of progress towards our goal. But we've dreamt big, and we still have a long way to go. So here are some of the things that we're working on right now. One of the main pieces of feedback that we've gotten over the last 6 months was that the asset system kind of sucks. So right now, what you have to do is you have to put images and other assets in the regular place for iOS apps. And this means that you have to rebuild and reinstall whenever you say change an image or something. It also means you have to do it differently for iOS and for Android. But what we're moving towards is the ability to put your assets in line with your JavaScript code. And this allows you to reload it instantly when you change an image, just like when you change code. We're also working on a bunch of developer tooling and making that better. We're making this a full-fledged platform, so we need to have a lot of good developer tools for it. And over the next couple weeks, we'll be adding some more Android modules, so keep on the lookout for those. So thanks for listening. What I'd like to ask from you is check out the framework, make an Android app, or an iOS app if you haven't done that. Just play with React Native, check it out. And tell us if we've done a shit job on some things. Because it's bound to happen, and we just want to know. So thanks, and let's all make mobile development better together.